Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Ravi, Andrew Rogers here with me. Andrew, what's going on, man?
We call him One Hand Lula. I should be asking you,
hey, everybody.
What's happening? How you feeling?
I'm doing all right. The hand's a little sore, just recovering from a little surgery, but we're okay. We're doing good. I was feeling good. Well, in the second half last night, I was feeling good. Wasn't really enjoying myself.
I can't imagine as a Niners fan you liked what you were seeing out of that group in the first half. How about the absolute choke artists on the other end of the football field, though? You look across the sideline and you think that team beat themselves.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's a two-way street, right? Obviously, the 49ers don't win that game without some help from the Lions. I do think that having been in that position before for the 49ers helped out, having been in the playoffs, having a head coach that has blown a huge lead when he was offensive coordinator at the Falcons, and having just guys that have been in that position, you could it felt like the moment got to Detroit a little bit. And I mean, you saw, I think it was the CJ Gardner, the cornerback for the Lions.
Gardner Johnson, yep.
Yeah, he was celebrating at like 21-7, and you're like,
because it started with a penalty that came after the INT, and they still scored a touchdown after that penalty, so that's why
they were feeling good.
I mean, they were on top of the world.
Yeah,
but man, I gotta tell you, at some point in time, you have to take what the other team is giving you, and Dan Campbell was so aggressive in that game that I think he got lost in the moment. Not like, the moment was too big for him, that he just got completely lost in it. But there are so many points in a football game that you can look at it scenario wise and think, okay, at this time I'm going to go for it on fourth down because yes, we're looked at as the underdog and I could really put this game out of reach. But there's other times, like when the game is tied, where you just take the points.
Yeah.
Or when you're down 3, I guess I should say, where you just take the points. Because if the game is tied, maybe then you stay a little bit aggressive to keep San Francisco on their toes. But when you're down 3 points in the game and you're in field goal range in the third quarter, I think it was late, if I remember correctly, that's where you take the points. I mean, you see the cutaway shot to Michael Badgley, and he's just kind of like mumbling under his breath, like, am I invisible? Like, did they forget I'm here?
What am I even doing here?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, some of the fourth downs, like, sure, early on in the game, go for it. Or, late in the game when you're heavily reliant on getting this so that you can get the touchdown, sure. But when you're at a point in time where you look at the score, you look at how the 49ers have come back, right? You have to reflect on those things a little bit and say, as much as I want to go for it because that's like me, I'm go for it, Dan. No, I should probably take the points here, tie the game, and let my defense go back out there and try to get a stop.
Yeah, and I definitely understand what you're saying, and I don't even necessarily disagree with you. What I struggle with is there's a really fine line between situationally smart football and doing what got you there, right? Aggressiveness got the Lions to this point. You don't want to change the character of who you are in that moment, right? Because then it does feel like the moment got a little too big for you. But at the same time, situationally, it probably made more sense to take the points there. And I know the analytics say this and that and whatever. And I'm not an anti-analytics guy by any means, but sometimes you have to go a little bit past that, especially when sometimes the numbers are sort of ambiguous, right? It's not necessarily a clear cut like, hey, you really should go for it here or not. But I do really struggle with this idea of changing who you are in the moment, right? We've heard Coach Rule talk about this more so in the practice sense, right? He preached before the season started, hey, I'm not going to change who I am in game week or during a game to win a game, right? Now, that's easy to say when you're playing, Minnesota week 1 in college football. It's a lot harder to say when you're playing in the NFC Championship with a trip to the Super Bowl on the line. But that's where I find that balance really interesting, because I think at the end of the day, if your conviction is like, hey, this is who we are, then I'm okay with that. I might disagree with the decision, but if you're the Lions, I think you can live with that if you feel like you're being true to your identity. Would they have won the game if they had gone for the points instead of gone for it on fourth down a couple times?
Not guaranteed.
Maybe, right? Maybe, but they also would have won the game if they didn't give up 27 second half points.
Yeah, well, and I hear what you're saying, but what people need to understand is it's not like the Lions didn't kick a field goal all year.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not saying take away the aggression completely because, look, early on in that game when you're going for it on fourth down, yeah, sure.
Works out great.
You're up a ton of points and you're fine, right? But it's not like they've never kicked a field goal this year.
It's the situational balance, right? And that's where it becomes, I think, really, really interesting because I think you're right. I think at least one of those they probably should have kicked it. But at the same time, it's really easy to look at one decision and say, yeah, probably should have done this different, probably should have done this differently. The fact is, they probably should have played a little bit of defense in the second half, right? Like, just a tiny bit, like 27 second half points after the way the 49ers offense looked in the first half is astoundingly bad.
And look at both games here for a hot sec.
Yeah.
Holding on to the football became crucial in both games. You see Zay Flowers stretch it out at the 1 yard line, which, Matt Rule got on the Twitter bot and started trolling a little bit. It's why he doesn't coach. Reaching across the goal line.
X Factor, baby. You see Christian McCaffrey do it every time. X Factor.
And the same thing with Gibbs. You turn the ball over when you get the ball back on the first play in your own territory. And the 49ers, with all the momentum, already have they're set up shop at the 25, 30-yard line?
Yeah.
And boom, they score again. And just like that, the game went from 24-7 to, I think, 24-21 at that point.
It was 24-17 because the first drive they got a field goal.
Field goal, you're right. Yeah.
So it's 24-17.
Right. So, yeah, you hold them to a field goal, and then boom, here they are within striking distance. It's a one-score game. So, there's a lot of things to point to, but I think one that people should start remembering, and this is probably Ravi Lula's next take, is that, Brock Purdy has once again shown that he can be a really good quarterback in that offense. And who can't be a good quarterback in the Kyle Shanahan offense?
I mean, Trey Lance, apparently.
Yeah, somewhat, right?
I mean, he didn't get a ton of opportunities. But, I mean, somebody, I was on Twitter last night kind of, trolling a little bit. I go, hey, the Brock Purdy haters are pretty quiet in that second half. And they were, right? But, somebody brought up like, hey, like Jimmy G doesn't win that game. And they're probably right. There's a lot of quarterbacks.
Does he not?
I don't think he does.
Because Purdy and Jimmy G are pretty close to one another. Like, if you look at both of them,
statistically,
like you can look at skill wise, they're not the same.
Yes,
because Purdy's legs give him.
And that was a huge factor yesterday.
And it was a big one. Like, what do you have? Like 2 or 3 big runs?
Yeah, especially that last one that gave them the last touchdown. It was like it was 20-some yard scramble.
But I don't know like how much higher up on the totem pole Purdy is to where Jimmy G was in his good seasons in San Francisco when San Francisco was making some headway in the playoffs.
I will say, just from the aesthetics of what it looks like, Kyle Shanahan trusts Brock Purdy dramatically more than he trusts Jimmy Garoppolo.
In terms of like what, throwing?
Like in play calling. I remember in that, go back to that 49ers Super Bowl run back in 2020, there were games where Jimmy Garoppolo was throwing the ball like sub 15 times a game. Like they did not trust him, and they didn't have Christian McCaffrey back then. They did not trust him to throw the football at all. I mean, I think at least in 2 of the games leading up to the Super Bowl, he threw it less than 20 times. And the degree to which Kyle Shanahan has opened up the offense for Brock Purdy this year is more than he ever did for Jimmy Garoppolo. So in terms of like overall talent, Jimmy Garoppolo is probably more physically talented than Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy has the trust of Kyle Shanahan in this offense to a dramatic degree more than Jimmy Garoppolo. And I do think the legs of Brock Purdy and his scrambling ability, he was channeling his inner Chubba last night a little bit on some of those scrambles. That made a huge difference in that game. The mobility that he has over Jimmy Garoppolo
Well, that's
alone
That's it.
probably wins the game for him in a game where Jimmy Garoppolo didn't. But the quarter,
you could also say too that Purdy stays on the field and Jimmy G stayed off the field
outside of his elbow exploding.
Durability is a big thing.
Yeah, I mean durability for Brock.
But he's also younger. He's only been in the league for 2 years.
Durability is a huge issue has been a huge problem for Garoppolo, and obviously Purdy's been fairly healthy. But I'll be totally honest here. I have no idea what Brock Purdy is as a quarterback at this point in his career. I don't.
I think he's pretty much Jimmy G right now.
I think
he's a better looking Jimmy G. Well, no, I shouldn't say that because Jimmy G's a pretty good looking guy.
As a quarterback,
he's a better looking Jimmy G.
And that might be true. I mean, I don't know. But there was a point in Jimmy G's career where we thought maybe he was more than he ended up being, right? Early on, either in the New England years, his first couple years in his first healthy season in San Francisco, they go 13-3, and you're like, oh, is this guy a dude? You don't really know. And that's the year that they went to the Super Bowl. I don't know. I have no idea what Brock Purdy is as a quarterback right now.
You put Brock Purdy in the Raiders offense. Does he do the same thing that Jimmy G? Or I guess I should say this. Does Brock Purdy perform like he is right now if he's in the Raiders offense?
I think
probably not.
Performs better than Jimmy G did.
But probably not.
But probably not like this.
And that's why I think it's a Kyle Shanahan thing more than it's a Brock Purdy thing.
Well, so we get into this debate about quarterbacks and systems because I really believe that most quarterbacks, not in the sense that most people mean it, but are system dependent. Because I think you take a lot of quarterbacks out of the system that they're successful in and they would struggle. I don't think there's very many quarterbacks that transcend their situation to be just great in any situation. Like Tom Brady, later in his career, transcended situation. He was going to be good no matter what. Early in his career, I don't think he was that guy. Early in his career, I think he was really dependent on that Patriots defense and Bill Belichick protecting him and all those things, right? To a very similar degree that I think Brock Purdy is. Not saying that's who Brock Purdy turns out to be, but if you look at so many quarterbacks, most of them are dependent on where they end up, who ends up coaching them, what they have around them, because there are countless guys that I've looked at and I'm like, if he ended up in a better situation, he probably would have been okay. Like, I don't know if Bryce Young sucks or not. He might.
He would be better if he was in a better situation.
Yeah,
I'm with you with what you're saying.
That's one of the worst situations in the league. Now, I thought the Texans were one of the worst situations in the league too, and C.J. Stroud is thriving. Now, is that because D'Amico Ryans has changed a bunch of things there? Is it because some of the skill position players ended up being way better than we thought they would? Maybe, I don't know. But that's when I say I have no idea what Brock Purdy is as a quarterback right now because, A, his track record is so short. I mean, he's played 25 career games. That's not even 2 full seasons yet, okay? And we just don't really have enough track record, especially apart from Kyle Shanahan. We have nothing apart from Kyle Shanahan. Now, where it gets interesting is with some of these other quarterback conversations because Patrick Mahomes, I think everybody looked like, oh, man, that's a guy that transcends situation.
Yeah, but he's like once in a blue moon.
But still, even beginning of his career, right? He was the 10th overall pick. He was not a sure thing coming out of college, and he goes to the perfect situation because every quarterback that plays under Andy Reid has their best part of their career under Andy Reid. Now, would Patrick Mahomes have transcended anyway? Probably, but is he on the path to be possibly the greatest of all time without Andy Reid? Probably not.
Yeah, and I'm with you there, but like it's a little bit different, right? Because the way Mahomes, it's a confidence thing, right? To begin with, when you're in that offense with Andy Reid, and like how to perform in those moments because you've been put in those moments more and more, it's easy for Mahomes to be successful, especially this season when everything kind of wasn't going the Chiefs' way.
Yeah.
But just because he's Patrick and because he's won Super Bowls and because he's played in those big games before, he knows how to win in those big games. If you put Purdy in an Andy Reid offense early on, does he become?
He doesn't become Mahomes. He doesn't become Mahomes because Mahomes is more talented.
Is just different.
But my question is more, okay, if you put Mahomes in a terrible situation, does he end up looking like he does now? Is he successful? Probably. Is he successful to the same degree? I don't know. if you put Brock Purdy in the situation with Andy Reid, he probably looks a lot like Alex Smith did with the Chiefs, which is pretty darn good.
I think that's fair.
He ended up being pretty good with the Chiefs. Those were the best years of his career, right? But I find it really...
It's about who you're surrounded with, though, too. And
there's just, I think people try and separate quarterbacks from situation too much when there's only a handful of guys that I think can actually be successful regardless of the situation. Ironically, I think Peyton Manning's one of those guys, one of the few, because the situation he inherited in Indianapolis was a dumpster fire. It was a disaster, and they were good immediately. He had very little help, and they got good right away. That's a guy where I'm like, okay, I think he actually transcends situation. I'm leaning that way with CJ Stroud right now because I thought that was a terrible situation when he took over. We'll see what the rest of his career looks like. But then you look at guys like Lamar Jackson's a really interesting case in this one, because I thought there was a lot of situations, despite the fact that he's prodigiously talented, right? I think there's a lot of situations in the league where he would not have been successful because the Ravens were really smart until yesterday. The Ravens were really smart in catering an offense to his strengths rather than asking him to perform an offense that they wanted to run, right? We had this conversation with Cynthia Freeland a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Justin Fields, right? The first half of this season, they're like, Justin Fields, we're going to make you like a drop back passer. It's like, well, Justin Fields might be one of the most talented runners in the league at any position. What on earth are you doing? They used to do this to quarterbacks in the early 2000s all the time, right? Give them a offense that is tailor-made to their skill set rather than trying to square peg, round hole this thing with an offense. You're like, oh, this is my offensive genius. We're going to run what he wants to run. It's like, you're an offensive genius when you can get the most out of the players you have. Not when you have
this. The next job.
That's how you get that's how you keep the job you're in too. Monken yesterday, I don't think he did Lamar any favors.
Lamar should have taken off more times than he did.
And part of that's on Lamar, right?
Yeah,
for not
there were
being
so
decisive.
many moments where I'm like, dude, run.
Mm-hmm.
Take what the defense is giving you.
Mm-hmm.
Just go.
Even if it's like 5-6 yards a pop. It doesn't have to be the game breaker every time.
He was settling with those short throws out wide. And it started to work in the second half with the Justice Hill, screen or drop off that gets 10 yards. But Lamar can also use his legs to get those 10 yards. And if you provide that look, then what are the Chiefs thinking about when Lamar drops back?
They have to scramble to get to Lamar, and then all of a sudden guys end up. But you saw it on the opening touchdown for the Ravens, where he scrambles around, has this wide open receiver. Then after that, that's the only time he did that the whole game. It was except for the Zay Flowers one where they ended up, because he kind of did the same thing on the long Zay Flowers one. Zay Flowers gets the penalty, and then he ends up fumbling a couple plays later. But so part of that is on Lamar. I agree. But it brings up another interesting question about Lamar in terms of, what is he as a quarterback? What is if he's your quarterback, what is your ceiling as a team? Because I'm usually not one of those people that's like, this guy can't win you a Super Bowl or whatever, right? Because we've seen Trent Dilfer win Super Bowls. We've seen Eli Manning win Super Bowls. We've seen guys that aren't Hall of Famers win Super Bowls, right? So I'm not saying it's impossible for Lamar Jackson to win you a Super Bowl. What I am asking is, if your team is centered around a Lamar offense, if that's what your identity is, I don't know if that wins you a Super Bowl, because we saw it. I mean, at some point, the track record has to speak over the talent. The talent's there, right? Talent's there for Lamar Jackson, no question. The track record is starting to stack up when, he hasn't gotten to a Super Bowl yet. He hasn't been able to get over that hump for the Ravens. The Ravens are always a pretty well put together team. It's not like he's dealing with a ton of deficiencies the way some guys are. And when you see a guy, even like a Joe Burrow, who gets to a Super Bowl in his second healthy year, you start to wonder, like, okay, is there something missing here where maybe Lamar, stylistically, it's harder to win in the playoffs that way? I don't know, but it did start to make me wonder yesterday.
Yeah, there was just a lot that went wrong for the Ravens. You could touch on so many different things offensively. Yes, Lamar is one. The second is, not giving the running backs any chances. Like they led the league in rushing this year, rushing attempts at least.
Yeah.
And
I think both.
How many carries? Less than 10? Is that what Justice Hill and Gus Edwards combined for?
I'll look it up. Well, yeah.
It's just crazy. Like that's one thing to point to. The second thing is you guys hurt yourselves so many times getting penalized for crazy things. Defensively,
they had six
carries.
As a team, they had 16 carries.
Then you look at defensively. How many times are you going to hit Patrick Mahomes after he releases the ball? How many times are you going to do that?
You got to be more disciplined than that.
What are we doing? Like, the taunting penalty is weird. The Zay Flowers one, like, yes, he kind of stood over him and spun the ball after his leg was being held. And it's always the last guy to get penalized in every situation.
Well, so the Zay Flowers thing is he did 3 things in a row you're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
Because he pushed him, and then he spun the ball, and then he stood over
Well, the
him.
push was warranted.
Sure. But
the spinning the ball was the thing that got him.
And if it was just pushing him, he probably doesn't get called for it, right?
But again, discipline is a great word. Didn't have that yesterday either.
Yeah.
What was the final score of that game? 17-7?
17-10.
17-10. The Ravens scored 10 points against the Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
Going into that game on Friday, what did I tell you that the Ravens do a really good job of, or at least have done a really great job of this season?
What's that?
It was beating good teams, and not just beating them, killing them,
smoking them. Yeah.
At one point this year, didn't they win like 38-6 against the Lions?
Yeah.
There were so many games this
49ers.
season when they just smacked the great opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And then what? At home, you just forget how to play. You forget how to be yourself. And you could see that because when Lamar was making mistakes down the stretch. Right.
Mm-hmm.
When Zay Flowers made a mistake, they were like practically so frustrated. They were in tears.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment got to them.
Yeah.
There were just points in time where it just didn't seem like the Ravens were in check.
Yeah. It's a really interesting conversation. I want to continue talking about some of the quarterback storylines. Obviously, we've got another good matchup with the 49ers and the Chiefs as well. Haven't talked a ton of Chiefs yet, but Patrick Mahomes continuing on that possible greatest of all time career trajectory. We'll talk more Super Bowl coming up next here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi Lula. Andrew Rogers here with me. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. So that is, they do that every time he scores. So it's it's a little bit of a tradition.
I don't catch
there.
Many Kansas City radio calls, so
well, that's the Niners.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I mean.
Ayuk is on fire.
But yeah, no, that's the Brandon. That's the
It sounds like the Spanish broadcast.
I think
they always do fun things like that.
I think that it's because it sort of sounds like
that's not Spanish, Shane.
Ayuk is on fire.
Tell me that isn't like what you would hear on a Spanish broadcast.
It does kind of sound like it's a Spanish broadcast, but no, it's a fun little thing they do. I think it's because it sort of sounds like the roof is on fire, but I don't know. I think that's
I think you're reaching, Rob.
I think that's where it comes from. That's what I think it sounds like anyway. I don't know. I might have just made that up. But no, we're talking a lot of Super Bowl here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I want to set up the show real quick before we dive back in to some of our conversations about quarterbacks. Coming up at 8 o'clock, we will have our regular Monday guest, Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. At 8:30, we're going to talk to Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. He covers Iowa football because Iowa has finally hired an offensive coordinator. And let me tell you, it is underwhelming. Can't wait to talk to Scott about that. Coming up at 9:30, we're going to talk to our very own Jacob Padilla of Hurrdat Sports about the Creighton game over the weekend. And then we will wrap up the show with Nate Davis, who covers the NFL for USA Today.
Who, instead of giving opinions, gives us facts.
Yeah, he gives us the good stuff there from Nate Davis. We appreciate him joining us to wrap up the show. But I wanted to talk about, we were talking about quarterbacks and kind of what these games mean for who they are and how we perceive them as quarterbacks. Obviously, Mahomes is pretty established as to who he is and what he is. The only question is how high he climbs on that ladder, right? Because you already see him knocking off, career playoff wins. I think he's got more than everybody but Brady at this point in terms of career playoff wins. He is knocking on the door of a third Super Bowl and the first person to go back-to-back in 20 years since Tom Brady, ironically enough. He's on that career trajectory of putting together a greatest of all time resume. Like that's the career path he's on. The question is, does he end up in the Brady conversation all by himself it's Brady and then everybody else? Does he end up in that tier with Brady? Does he end up in that next tier, which is a very good tier to be in, with guys like Joe Montana and people like that with multiple Super Bowls and incredible career statistics? That's the only question left for Mahomes, assuming health, right? That's the only question, is how high does he climb on that list? The rest of the guys that we saw play yesterday, there are, I think, real questions about who they are as quarterbacks and where their place is both in the league now and historically, what they'll end up being, because Lamar is about to be a 2-time MVP who hasn't been to the Super Bowl, and that's a unique situation to be in. To be that level of good and to not even have a Super Bowl appearance is strange.
Yeah.
Because, if you, and we can get into this later or maybe even later this week, but there's basically 3 categories of guys that make that win Super Bowls. You've got your Hall of Famers, which is the vast majority. If you look at the list of guys that have won Super Bowls, most of them are Hall of Famers. Then you've got the good but not great guys. I consider those kind of your Eli Mannings of the world, right? Good quarterbacks, maybe borderline Hall of Famer because he's got the 2 Super Bowls. But at any given time, you don't look at Eli Manning, you're like, that's the best quarterback in the league, right? You just didn't. That's not who he was. Joe Flacco is a good example of that. Really good quarterback for stretches of his career. Got on a heater one year, won a Super Bowl, right? Then you've got the total outliers like your Trent Dilfers of the world. You've got like a Hofstetter back in the early 90s with the Giants. You've got like a Mark Rypien for the Redskins in the early 90s. Just these total kind of outliers of like, yeah, that guy's fine. Not really who I think of in terms of that guy's going to lead me to a Super Bowl. So where does Lamar start to fall in those categories? Because if he doesn't end up winning a Super Bowl, his resume is going to be missing a huge piece because of everything else he's accomplished.
Yeah, he'll be in between the good and great argument.
Yeah, he'll be
like that's where
you'll kind of no man's land.
He'll fall in that tier.
Which, who else falls in that tier is a guy like Dan Marino, one of the most talented guys we've ever seen play the position, but has this glaring hole in his resume for a quarterback of that caliber. There's not many quarterbacks of Dan Marino's caliber that never won a Super Bowl. There just isn't. Everybody that's been a dude like that pretty much has got a Super Bowl. Dan Marino's that huge outlier. Lamar, obviously their games are very different, but being a probably multiple-time MVP, and listen, maybe he ends up winning a Super Bowl next year, and this is a stupid conversation, but as of right now, for somebody of that caliber, there's a glaring hole in his resume.
Well, yeah, and you look at that across all sports, though. Mm-hmm. All sports have a Dan Marino. All sports have a potential Lamar Jackson. You look at the NBA,
like
Charles Barkley is the big example there.
Karl Malone.
Steve Nash, Yao Ming. These are guys that are Hall of Famers, but just never got that NBA title. Yeah. You look at Stanley Cup, the non-winners, Jerome McGinley, Paul Correa, big names in the NHL world, names that, when you watch them play, you're like, holy shoot, I can't believe these guys don't have, a Stanley Cup title underneath them. World Series, there's plenty of Hall of Famers, but
it's way more common in baseball.
Yeah, but there's also so many spots on the field that are more individualized than they are team-wise, so that's why you see that. And then the Super Bowl, you have Barry Sanders that never won a Super Bowl. He's not a quarterback, right? But Jim Plunkett isn't in the Hall of Fame. He's a Super Bowl winning quarterback.
2 times, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest arguments in the NFL Hall of Fame world. So there's so many that you can kind of point to that every sport has a Lamar Jackson or a Dan Marino. It's just going to be interesting in terms of legacy writing. Mm-hmm. Can Lamar get out of that conversation? Yeah. Can he go from the good between the good and great and become just great. Because you can look at like Aaron Rodgers, for example, multiple MVP winner, NFL MVP winner, but also a one-time Super Bowl, one-time Super Bowl champ.
Only one-time Super Bowl
appearance. I'm thinking like Mike Sauter here. Like I'm just automatically giving the Jets a Super Bowl. And you know, you look at Aaron Rodgers though and think, no doubt, Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
no question. But he only has one Super Bowl. So like you look at Lamar Jackson right now, and you're probably thinking, yeah, no doubt Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
But is he like in the greatest of tiers when it comes to quarterbacks? If he wins a Super Bowl, is he like
it puts him in a different tier
with Aaron Rodgers now? Is he in that tier?
Probably pretty close.
You're probably right there.
Yeah, multiple MVPs, a Super Bowl. But you also look at Aaron Rodgers and you say, you probably would have expected him to win more than one Super Bowl based on the talent, based on the MVPs. Because I guess the point I'm sort of making here is, if you are a franchise and you draft a quarterback and he ends up being an MVP caliber guy, you expect that to translate into a Super Bowl at some point. Like that's if you nail the draft pick to the point where that dude's an MVP, you're like, yep, we're definitely getting a Super Bowl. And with Lamar Jackson so far, that hasn't been the case, even though, like I said, he's likely to be a 2-time MVP winner. It's a really unique situation for Baltimore to be in because they have a dude. They have one of those dudes, and it hasn't translated to success yet. It's got to be really frustrating for them. And then you kind of flip the coin on the other side, and you've got a Brock Purdy who I know he was in MVP conversation for part of the year. He's not in that conversation anymore, but a guy that likely will never win an MVP. I would guess he probably never wins an MVP unless his career takes a totally different path than I anticipate. But very well, especially with this team and this system, very well could be end up winning a Super Bowl. It's a really interesting dynamic there. But there's another guy that we haven't talked about yet that played yesterday. And I know you have some thoughts on him. So we'll get to that coming up next.
Oh, good tease.
Because we've only got 30 seconds left here. I don't want to cut you short on guy Jared Goff, a guy who early on looked like he was on a great career path, made a Super Bowl, I believe, in year 2, much like Brock Purdy. Kind of fell out of favor.
Got the perfect comp.
Got traded, and then makes it back to an NFC Championship game with a different team that he helped raise from the dead with Dan Campbell. Really interesting situation with Jared Goff because he is a tough comp. I'm glad you've got one because I was struggling to come up with somebody whose career mimicked his. We'll get to that and more as we wrap up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, some really good comments and interactions on there this morning. Scary Gary chimes in with an interesting comment that we actually talked about for most of the break. He says, Lamar just bad timing, played in Mahomes era, going to hurt all these great QBs, Josh Allen, etc. And that's an interesting point because I agree with him to a certain extent, but you also look at, okay, before the Mahomes era, you had the Brady era, and Brady is unquestionably the most successful quarterback of all time in terms of making it to Super Bowls, winning Super Bowls, etc. Right?
Just winning.
Just winning, right? Even if you're like, I like this guy better, which, whatever. He's got the GOAT resume. I'm not going to have that argument today. But if you look at even Brady, who won at an unprecedented rate, Peyton Manning broke through twice. Eli Manning broke through twice, which is a wild one. Drew Brees broke through. Aaron Rodgers broke through. Mahomes broke through before it was over.
Cam Newton, technically.
Yeah, Cam Newton.
He didn't win it, but he technically broke through in the AFC.
No, that was the NFC. That's
NFC. I'm sorry.
Panthers.
Excuse me.
Yeah. But that was the year Manning broke through the AFC. I mean, Joe Burrow broke through Kansas City to make it to the Super Bowl. Didn't win it, obviously. But you've got a track record of guys who broke through during the era of Tom Brady greatness. And so, I understand he probably limits the number of opportunities that other people are going to get. He certainly has been the boogeyman to Josh Allen for sure, but it doesn't prevent. It's not like even with a guy like Brady, even with a guy like Mahomes, there's still other opportunities for guys to break through. And it's not like this. It's not like he's going to win the Super Bowl every year, right? There's going to be other opportunities. I get they've made it 4 of the last 5 years. Drunk Monk, Big Ben broke through twice during the Brady
had some
era.
Good comments today
as well.
Also pointed out the numbers for the Ravens and their inability to run the football.
6 carries between their 2 running backs, 16 total carries. Half of them were Lamar Jackson. Like, that was Todd Monken just.
Which is okay to have half of them be your quarterback. Let's just double, maybe triple the number that you give to your RBs.
16 is not enough, and 6 running back carries is certainly not enough. But my point is, there's been a ton of guys that have broken through, even in the most unprecedented run of success we've ever seen from a quarterback. So I have a hard time just giving people the only time I give people a pass for not winning titles is through the Jordan 90s with the Bulls, because really nobody broke through while he was healthy and that last stretch of his career. When he was healthy and actually playing, well, not healthy because he was healthy, but when he was actually playing and not retired, nobody broke through. So it's like, this is kind of a steel curtain here. If Jordan's playing from 90 to 98, you get nothing and you'll like it, right? That's just kind of what it was. Hakeem Olajuwon should thank him every day for retiring and letting him get the two championships. But that's what it was, right? And that's not how it has been in football. Basically, during any stretch. You go back to Joe Montana in his dominant stretch in the 80s. He won 4 Super Bowls. That means there were 6 other years that other guys won Super Bowls. This is an unprecedented run of success. Other guys still win. So I have a hard time giving Lamar a pass for that. I have a hard time giving Josh Allen a pass for that. And maybe they will break through at some point, right? But the fact that they haven't yet, and Joe Burrow did, Joe Burrow is really the only one that broke through that Mahomes barrier, tells me
so far.
Yeah. But that's why I like Joe Burrow better than those 2 guys, because obviously he's struggles with health a little bit, but he's been super productive, and he's the one guy that's been able to get past Mahomes. So I put him a little bit notch above those other 2 guys.
And this would have been the year to see somebody else. It would have been the year to see Lamar, to see Josh Allen, because the Chiefs on paper weren't as good as they were the past few seasons. I mean, you removed Tyreek Hill, and their offense depletes a ton.
Yeah.
Now, Rashee Rice, I thought, did a really nice job in the second half of the season to become that number 1 option for Patrick Mahomes. Kelce found he found a way to figure it out in the playoffs, because this season, oh my goodness, especially for somebody that drafted this guy 6th overall in fantasy. Talk about maybe the biggest bust of the year. Watching Kelce put up numbers like 3 for 36 when last year we're talking about this guy at minimum putting up 70, 80 yards. I joked about this with a buddy last week. By the way, I hit that bet with the 40 yards, Travis Kelce. But I joked about this with him because I said, man, at what point in time were we ever discussing, man, can Kelce get 40 yards?
Yeah.
Like, at what point in time did we sit back and say that? And like, no one's ever asked that question before. And I was concerned that he wasn't going to get 40 yards at a football game.
And there's a part of me that wonders, and I think we talked about this last week. There's a part of me that wonders if the Chiefs knew, because what have we seen? We've seen Rashee Rice.
They knew he was going to date Taylor Swift.
Absolutely.
And you can doubt the Chiefs.
No.
I wonder if The Simpsons predicted that. I'm waiting for the episode.
Probably did. It was actually like 4 years. No, I'm just. There's a part of me that wonders if the Chiefs knew, because Andy Reid is like, if anybody's going to go galaxy brain on this, I trust it to be Andy Reid. But part of me wonders if they knew that at some point they're going to need some of these wide receivers to make plays. We saw maybe the biggest catch of that game,
MVS at the end,
made by Valdez-Scantling, who had been between him and Kadarius Toney had been the GOATs in the bad way the entire season for the Chiefs. And he makes
they were the difference between a 13-win season and an 11-win season.
And he made a huge play at the end of the game to seal that thing for the Chiefs. And so I wonder how much was Andy Reid kind of force feeding the wide receivers who weren't ready yet, because he knew Kelce could be there. He knew Kelce would be okay and be ready, Because you saw the Patriots do this with Gronk a little bit as he got older. They wouldn't use him a ton during the regular season, and then they'd start to ramp things up in the playoffs and try and get reps for the wide receivers that they didn't trust quite as much. If that's what they were doing, first of all, it's genius by Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. But we've seen Rashee Rice emerge. We've seen MVS not be a huge liability. And we've seen Pacheco emerge as well as a legitimate running threat. Plus,
7th-round pick.
Now you get those 7th-round picks are pretty good. We find out now.
Maybe for kickers. Harrison Butker was in the 7th round.
So was Brock Purdy. But now
just barely.
Now you see, he was just barely. Now you see Travis Kelce also become who we know Travis Kelce is. And now you've got some receivers with a little bit of confidence, some receivers that you trust a little bit more to make plays. And now the Chiefs offense looks as good as it has all year. And you've still got that incredible defense, by far the best defense they've had in the Patrick Mahomes era. That's what makes them scary now is, okay, the receivers aren't strictly liabilities anymore. You've got some guys that can make plays. Travis Kelce is playing like Travis Kelce again. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. And you've got a defense that's frankly very scary. That defense is so good. It's just a really interesting dynamic on that Chiefs offense as it's kind of evolved in the playoffs into something we didn't see in the regular season.
Well, and they struck out a couple of times before they hit big with Rashee Rice. And I don't even want to say they hit big, but until they just hit with Rashee. I mean,
to have a functional guy.
Let's go back just a year or two. They draft Sky Moore, and what did Sky Moore become?
Nothing.
Yet, at least, right?
Yeah.
Right now, he is nothing, and all he does is drop punts.
He had a couple nice moments in the playoffs last year, but
you look at Mecole Hardman, same type of situation. They drafted him thinking like, oh, okay, he's going to be a nice pairing with Tyreek Hill. And then, we've seen what Hardman's been for that team too. That just hasn't amounted to much. So they finally hit with Rashee, but they had to because this is the year they didn't have Tyreek Hill. They always had that safety net with Tyreek like, oh, well, we're still okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But you still have Tyreek.
But until Tyreek goes to Miami and you're like, uh-oh, now we only have Travis. Now what? They needed somebody to step up right away, and that was Rashee Rice. Should we get to Goff now or later?
You're going to have to deal with the Chiefs.
Because I can make a quick comp if we need to.
Let's make a quick comp, and if it sparks some thought, we'll pick it up later.
So Jared Goff, you had said, a pretty tough person to
He's an interesting case
to evaluate.
Yeah.
Based on his ceiling, like what his ceiling could be.
Yeah.
I think Jared Goff's ceiling and best comp so far is Matt Ryan.
Oh, that's a good one.
And the reason I say that is, for one, this year, you look at what the Lions were and what the Falcons were in that 2016-17 Super Bowl run, pretty similar. Defenses weren't fantastic. The offenses really was the driving force. Now, Goff has more weapons than Ryan had, especially in the running back department. But I think those two are like neck and neck with like, okay, if you had to use some what's it, foresight? Is that the word?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got there. And figure out what Jared Goff could be by career's end. I think it's Matt Ryan. You look at the stats, they already align. And plus you look at how they stylistically play. Both are really great pocket passers, have great presence in the pocket. They're reliable. They have accurate arm strength. It's kind of like the perfect match. Like if we were playing match game, I think I just made the match.
That's a really interesting one. I might pick that up in a little bit because I think there's some interesting implications based on that comparison on who Jared Goff can be and who Matt Ryan ended up being. We will pick that up in a little bit. Coming up next, though, we're going to talk to our friend Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. A lot going on with Nebraska. We'll pick that up here coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Ravi Lula. Andrew Rogers here with me. We are joined now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline by our Monday friend Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, how are you this morning?
Great. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you too,
Monday.
Man.
How were the championship games, the conference championship games for you this weekend? Did you enjoy those?
They were awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. They were a lot of fun to watch. So, I think you get probably the two teams at the beginning of this season that most people would have agreed would be there. Maybe somebody might have had Buffalo, but if you go back all the way to the beginning of the season, these are probably the two teams that you would have anticipated predicting for the Super Bowl. And, it was fun to watch the first game. Hard to watch a team kind of blow it, which Baltimore did. And then Detroit kind of blew it too. Like there's a lot of coaching lessons to be learned there. And the problem with that is that you just don't ever know if you'll get back. And so when you have an opportunity to win a game and you're up by that much and you lose it, you don't know if you'll ever return. And now you got to go win, 14, 15 games to get back to where you were in the third quarter of that game. And that's going to be a demoralizing thought for the Lions as reality sets in over the next couple of weeks.
Sam, how much stock do you put into sort of evaluating quarterbacks in terms of what their ceiling is and what they make your team capable of after a weekend like we just saw? Do you put much stock in kind of trying to figure out like the Jared Goff and Lamar Jacksons of the world, or is it just, hey, they got beat by better teams and you move on?
The majority of Super Bowl champions until, I don't know, I guess Tom Brady, but not really. The majority of Super Bowl champions were they had good quarterbacks, guys that are in the Hall of Fame, but the quarterback play was a byproduct of the strength of the team. And so you can go back through, the 60s and the 70s. Yeah, Bart Starr's in the Hall of Fame. They didn't win the Super Bowl because of Bart Starr. Mm-hmm. And maybe the Cowboys won Super Bowl because of Roger Staubach, but not really. You go back and watch the games, which I've done. Dallas doesn't beat Miami, beat the crap out of Miami, and beat the crap out of Denver because of Roger Staubach. And so this is a newer shift in the NFL paradigm where we assess the quarterback. I'm still not sure if it's legitimate for Brady. I think he was a great quarterback. Obviously, I don't know if he was somehow greater than the sum of the parts with the Patriots. Patrick Mahomes is greater than the sum of the parts. And so one of the things that you have to kind of process with him is there's a lot of things he's doing that are just sort of off schedule enough that you have to pin both wins and losses to some degree on many of the things that he does. And so, Mahomes does change that conversation a little bit. I'm not saying he's singular. I think Aaron Rodgers changed that conversation to some degree too. But a lot of quarterbacks who have come along the way have been a part of the thing. I mean, Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, Joe Flacco, all have won Super Bowls. Maybe Joe Montana changed that a little bit, but Joe got hurt and then they bring in Steve Young and nothing's really changed. So like the 49ers had great players all over the place. I'd probably put Montana at the top of the list of best quarterbacks all time, with Rodgers and Mahomes probably tied for second. But, I don't know. That's a good question. Brady altered that conversation because there's a lot of people who like Brady and think he's great. And then they have to, on the back end, manifest reasons why he's better than players who clearly have more physical abilities than he does. And you can reference his brain. That's fine with me. I mean, I think Brady was one of the best working the system quarterbacks of all time. And he was kind of running the offense with the Patriots. But, he was part of a whole. And I think that's probably true of almost every quarterback except Mahomes. And so when Goff and Purdy are squaring off yesterday, I think they both played okay. But, that's the other player. That's Christian McCaffrey. That's, Brandon Ayuk, that's all the other things. The 49ers are in the Super Bowl because they drafted really well and they went and made the trade for McCaffrey when they absolutely had to.
And they also went and got Chase Young this year.
They did. And Chase Young and Randy Gregory have helped that team mostly because, they make them a little fresher late in the game. But McCaffrey was the one who change that conversation. I think anybody who really enjoys the NFL, which I do, is happy to see Christian McCaffrey play in the Super Bowl because that is a special, special player who just keeps coming. Like he just doesn't, he over the course of a game, you might hold him down for a while, but there he is at the end. So, he's it's good to see him get a chance. I don't know that they're going to win, but it's good to see him get a chance to play in one. And again, yeah, Mahomes is going to change that conversation. He's going to change it. I think it was Jameel Hill on Twitter last night wrote something I actually agree with. My wife certainly does because she hates Tom Brady. That Patrick Mahomes does not need to win 6 Super Bowl rings in order to be better than Tom Brady. That's very true. Like that's not how it works. It happens to be how it works in the NBA because Michael Jordan is still the best player of all time. And the argument being, well, LeBron is better. I don't think he is, but you could argue that. Mm-hmm. I think if Mahomes gets to 4 or 5, the other 2 don't really matter that much. Nobody's going to sit there and say, well, now, remember that Panthers Super Bowl. And that's just, we got to move past that. There was a point in time where Brady became the best quarterback on the planet. That didn't happen until about 2011 or 2012. Well, it happened in 2007. For sure. Yeah. 2007, 2008. Yeah. But, that didn't happen right away.
But that's 6 years into his career, yeah.
It is. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league his second year when he actually got to play. And so that's challenging. The other thing that challenges it is Lamar Jackson's now won 2 MVPs. And I love watching Lamar Jackson. He's terrific. And you could actually argue he is the MVP of that team because everything is oriented around his skill set, for sure. I think the Ravens are too quarterback oriented, and it's probably cost them a little bit. Because yesterday, watching that game, I'm like, why is Baltimore not running the ball? Mm-hmm. Like, can they not? Are they afraid they can't do it? Are they, why are they abandoning who they are and what they are and turning this into, all right, Lamar, here's your day. Let's drop back I don't know how many times he threw the ball. Drop back 40 times and let's sling it around. And that's not his game. And I thought that was kind of strange. Like, if you ask, however many people, who's a better quarterback, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, people wouldn't hesitate to say it's Patrick Mahomes. Mm-hmm. It is. It'll always be that. There's never going to change. There's never going to be a day because that's how good Patrick Mahomes is. And it felt like yesterday Baltimore was trying to prove something. And I didn't really understand what they were trying to prove. And they lost the game as a result. I think that's part of why they lost. They lost because they, had personal fouls and the fumble and all the rest. But I felt like they lost the game in part because we're gonna beat someone else than we're not today. And our running backs are going to carry the ball a total of 8 times. It makes no sense. And, they got away from themselves. And, here's Kansas City over here running Isaiah Pacheco, who I love, 25 times. Kansas City kind of has learned more about who it is, and they're a better coach team, and they have a better quarterback, and they won the game. So, on we go to the Super Bowl, and I'll be rooting for the 49ers, but I'm sure the Chiefs will win.
Yeah, Sam, a lot of good points there. We'll change gears. We'll switch over to the focus of Nebraska now.
All right.
Let's talk about just quickly that the basketball game over the weekend. We can talk both men and women because the women took on Caitlin Clark, and of course that had a lot of eyes on it. But the men, of course, on the road, and once again the road struggles continue. For me, it's rebounding. For you, and it can be the same. What have you taken immediate notice of when looking back at this team's road struggles?
Well, I think a lot of teams struggle on the road. They're not the only ones, and there have been stretches where I think they've played well on the road. I think what I watched in that game was that Nebraska got an early lead and Maryland pushed the press button and it worked. And Nebraska was really just got messed up. I mean, they were discombobulated by Maryland's press and that changed the game. And sometimes coaches are too proud to do that early in games, but I thought Maryland did a good job of knowing what they had to do in order to affect change. And that's what I saw. The rebounding piece, I think, does come into play. You don't have Jawan Gary. That doesn't help you. I think there's probably, I'd have to go back and watch it again. My sense is that what Hoiberg's frustrated with is the rebounding on the defensive end of the floor.
Mm-hmm. I
think offensively, Nebraska wanted to get back, and so they weren't necessarily playing for a lot of offensive rebounds. So, I think they're an inconsistent team because what makes them dangerous is you don't really know who's going to beat you on a given night, and you don't. It could be Casey, it could be Mast, it could be CJ, it could be Bryce, it could be Jawan when he's healthy. The flip side of that is there are nights when none of them are on, or you don't know what's going to get you beat. And I think that's the flip side of the coin, is that sometimes, when you have a team like that and things aren't going well for one or a couple other guys don't step up, and then it kind of snowballs into what it's going to be. So, that's a little bit of the nature of this team. There's times when they miss Sam Griesel, for sure. But, I always kind of thought it was going to be an NIT squad. We'll see. They have a huge game on Wednesday. If they win that game at PBA, they're right back on track for where they want to go. So they do need to win a road game somewhere in there. But I don't think Maryland was their easiest road game remaining. I really don't. I think they've got a few more that are frankly more winnable, and we'll see what happens.
We're talking with Sam McKewon of the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, you mentioned that Wisconsin game coming up this week. That is one of 5 home games remaining for Nebraska. Obviously, beating a top 15 Wisconsin team would be a huge resume builder for Nebraska. But if they're not able to get that one, and they aren't able to get any road wins, that puts them at 19 wins in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, is that enough to get them into the NCAA tournament, or would they need help in the Big Ten tournament, winning a game or two in order to kind of give themselves a chance at that at-large bid?
Yeah, I think if they end with 19 in the regular season, they're going to have to win 2 in the Big Ten tournament, and then they're going to have to hope.
Mm-hmm.
If they win 20 in the regular season, then I don't know that they need to win one in the Big Ten tournament, although it wouldn't hurt.
Sure.
If they get to 20, I don't know how many wins that means for them in the league. I think it means 10 wins or 11. I can't remember. But if they get there, then you're looking at, a 6 or a 7 seed. You get a favorable draw. I think 21 probably gets you there. If they beat Purdue, which they did,
mm-hmm.
and they beat Wisconsin on Thursday, I think the tournament committee is going to say, listen, yeah, this team struggles on the road, but when they have to go beat good teams, they've done that. And, that's, I think, part of what they will say. And then they've got an opportunity to go to Northwestern and sweep Northwestern. And if you sweep Northwestern, that's 2 games that you have over another bubble team. And that's a separator.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a separator moment. And so that's a game that you want to circle in purple. Go beat Northwestern, because Northwestern's right on the bubble too. And quite frankly, they look at times to me to be a better team than Nebraska. But Nebraska beat them once. And if Nebraska beats them again, there's no argument. Nebraska's got that, has got the thing. Kansas State's going to go into meltdown mode, but Nebraska's got an advantage over them. And then I don't anticipate it being a super strong year on the, the mid-major bubble. It looks like it's, I don't know. It just, some years what you're running into is the committee likes to reward, no offense to the committee, East Coast basketball teams that play in mid-major leagues because that's what they grew up with and they like it. I don't know that that's this year. I don't know if that's, there's years where the A10 gets 4 or 5 and you're like, really? And last year the Mountain West got 5 and they San Diego State advanced far, but the other teams didn't do great. So, there's years where you can tell they get real enamored with mid-major teams that, then sit there as an 11 or a 12 as if they're not very good, but they're good at, whatever. And so we'll see how that all turns out. I think Nebraska's got a favorable opportunity this year if they get to 20, which in my opinion means they beat Wisconsin. So biggest game of the year is Wisconsin. Second biggest game remaining is Northwestern. You win those 2, and you're going to win some other ones along the way.
Sam, you mentioned that game at Northwestern. In your mind, is that the most winnable road game left on the schedule, or is it just the most important because Northwestern's also a bubble team?
I don't know what Michigan's crowd's going to look like when Nebraska goes there.
Sure. By that
they
time
don't have a lot of success. They don't have a lot of success against Michigan. Michigan's athleticism seems to give Nebraska problems. They have never beaten Michigan there, and so that I think will be an issue. But that may be the team that's the most beatable. So they play at Illinois. They go to Penn State, do they not?
No, Penn State's at home.
They go to Indiana.
They go to Indiana and Ohio State.
They go to Indiana, Ohio State. I don't know. I mean, again, Ohio State's a team that Nebraska just hammered. And, Ohio State's crowd may or may not show up. You just never know. So, and they've beaten Ohio State at Ohio State before. They're not afraid to do that. They did it 2 years ago. So you never know. I mean, I think usually it's when you least expect that you get one of them. And
so you're saying at Illinois?
They've had a hard time there too. Illinois is a hard team for Nebraska to beat as well. They have not beaten Illinois, I think, in the Hoiberg era. So that's a tough one. That's a tough one too.
Sounds like a lot of things I've heard before, at least recently with Nebraska. I haven't had that win in this era. Oh, wait, what happened this year, right?
Yeah, I know.
Here, Sam, let's change gears and talk football for the last 5 minutes of this, because it was another big recruiting weekend. But, one thing for me, I noticed that it's never a dull moment with this staff going the extra mile on the recruiting trail. We even had Coach Rule you mentioned Michael Jordan earlier. He took the MJ approach with Cortez's mom and trying to win her over just as much as he's trying to win Cortez over. Where does that approach rank among the importance of securing a commitment in general, though? Because it just seems like Rule has such a good grasp on working in the whole family.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to recruit. I try to recruit the whole group. I think he's probably pretty effective with parents. That would be my hunch. He's a convincing person. He's a genuine person. I think if you talk to Matt Rule for very long, he's pretty real. And I think that probably works with parents and probably works with kids. I could see there being some athletes that are like, hey, he seems a little intense, and I'm going to go with this guy over here because maybe he isn't quite as, ferocious of a personality. But I mean, Rule's got a talent for being honest. And I think one of his strengths is that he's going to be really clear up front about what he's about, what his staff's about. And you're either going to like that and say, yeah, I want to be a part of that, or you're not. I think there's going to be very little gray area. So very little like, oh, I came under false pretenses, and I realized I hate this place, and it's not what I thought it would. I think he takes pains to say this is exactly what it's going to be like, and like he tells people this is how cold it is, and all those things. So I think he tries to put a lot of that stuff up front. He's good with the parents that way. I don't know if they'll get Cortez Mills. In fact, I would bet against it. But I think they've done a really good job of being really direct with players. And somewhere along the way, you get somebody that's like, yeah, I want to be there. Ja'Cory Barnes. He didn't have to go to Nebraska. He did not have to go to Nebraska. And I think that's an example of like, okay, yeah, I'll come and see what it's, this suits me. And I think that's one of the strengths of Rule's recruiting. It wasn't Mike Riley's strength, and Scott Frost could be kind of wishy-washy. I don't know. Like, some people didn't always know where Scott Frost was coming from because he was a little bit more reserved. But I would say Matt Rule is similar to Bo. I mean, Bo couldn't hide who he was. So he was incapable of doing so. And so, you either wanted to come or you didn't. And there was a lot of guys who didn't. But Rule's similar. I think he's a little bit more personable than Bo was.
Sam, you talk about Cortez Mills, you talk about Ja'Cory Barney. That kind of goes into what you wrote this morning, or for this morning's Monday Rewind, about Coach Rule going all in on Miami and Florida. Is him being upfront and honest about what you're getting, does that give you hope that he can be more successful in the Sunshine State than, say, Scott Frost or Mike Riley, who did land some guys from Florida but had a really hard time retaining them?
So this is what I wrote today for listeners who may not have read it. I think they had 24 non-IMG Academy recruits. We don't count IMG because none of the guys are actually from Florida. And so I think they had 24 between 2014 and 2023, 2022 or something like that. I'm not counting, Dwight Boodle in there. And so out of that group, I think their hit rate was like 7 of 24. And I'm being generous there because I'm including like Marvin Scott and Taman Lynham, guys that I would describe as like full-time starters. But out of that group, they had the full-time starters were DiCaprio Boodle, Chris Jones, the corner from back in the day, and then Alex Davis, who I don't know that you would have described Alex Davis as one of the better defenders in Husker history, but he did start for 2 years. He started on the 2017 defense, my goodness. And so what I would say is that they haven't had much of a hit rate down there. They've had a lot of guys leave, maybe some misevaluations. As you look at the guys that they signed in 2020 who actually turned out to be a dependable player in the collegiate level, oldie Jaden Francois, and Jaden Francois is on his third team. So, I think there's some of it's talent evaluation, some of it's they get the guys up here and they really need to develop the culture, make sure that they know why they're here. I do think there's a moment where you get to a certain number of kids from Miami and they all are like, yeah, we got each other's back. And I think that's what they're going for. That's part of what they're trying to get at is having each other's backs. I think that's important. And so I think they're trying to recruit that city. We'll see if it pans out.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, good stuff this morning. We appreciate your time as always. We will talk to you again next week. Bye.
See you, Sam.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Really good stuff there from Sam. In just a minute here, we will jump into some other local college football news with Iowa and Scott Dochterman because they finally hired an offensive coordinator, and I don't know how excited people are about it.
I believe the saying is know thy enemy.
Coming up next, we got more Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio. We're halfway through the show here on a Monday on AM 590 ESPN Omaha and ESPN Tri-Cities. I want to tell you about our friends at Dyer Law. If you've been hurt in a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. Call the Dyer Law team at 402-393-7529 or visit dyer.law to chat with trusted professionals about your personal injury claim. That's DYER.law. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Scott Dochterman. He covers college football and Iowa for The Athletic. Scott, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, guys. How about yourselves?
Good, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet.
We are doing well here on a Monday morning. Had a nice football weekend, and Iowa during championship weekend for the NFL made a little bit of news as well, finally hiring their offensive coordinator in Tim Lester. Scott, just your initial reactions to that hire and any background you might have on kind of how it took place and ended up being Lester as the guy.
Well, my first response is that I was telling people at Iowa that, if you would just not do it on Sunday, I would really appreciate it because that's well, I kind of wanted to watch the championship games, but, blew out most of the first one because of this. But no, seriously, this is, it was 90 days since Brian Ferentz was announced he wasn't going to come back. And so this has been a long, long process and one that has driven pretty much everybody batty in this state. and now, and Kirk kind of, puts everything in kind of its own little segment. And so he didn't really start getting really involved, I guess, or really attacking this situation until January after the bowl game. And it looked for a while like it was going to be Paul Christ. And I know they had a lot of discussions, and basically I was told that the offer was there for Paul, but at the same time, the former Wisconsin coach, is an analyst at Texas. He's working with Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, so that seemed like an opportunity he didn't want to pass up. So then Iowa kind of looked around, and the last couple of days it was between him and Kevin Johns from Duke, and he did the interviews. And I think, and we'll talk to Kirk more in depth here later this week, but a lot of what I kind of gathered is, Tim had some pretty good numbers at Western Michigan. I'm really interested in knowing how he marries kind of the Maction style that they had at times at Western Michigan with what Iowa likes to do. But he's got a lot of experience. He's from the Chicagoland, and which is only 3.5 hours away from Iowa City. So I think it's a hire that hasn't necessarily inspired a lot of people. I think there's been a lot of pushback, but I think most of the people will kind of rally around the flag at some point.
Yeah, Scott, I wanted to ask because, it was a hire that kind of seemed underwhelming, by the majority of Iowa fans, at least the ones that I'm seeing on Twitter and interacting with that way, which I know is not always a good sample size. But that's why I'm curious, as you heard that name, especially after you hear a name like Paul Christ, who, maybe didn't have the end of the tenure he wanted in Wisconsin, but I think is well respected as an offensive mind. Was there any sort of letdown when the name ended up being Tim Lester as opposed to somebody that maybe people were a little bit more familiar with?
There was from a lot of the fans. And I think, as you mentioned, with Paul Christ, I don't know that he excited them as much as they thought that it would be a good fit, because, they competed against each other for several years. And Paul's style of play is kind of comparable to what Iowa does. It's just Iowa really needed a revamp in the passing scheme. That was a disaster and has been for a while. And so, that's kind of what people were wanting and expecting. And, they kicked the tires on some candidates like an Andy Ludwig that really wasn't interested. And then Kevin Johns seemed to be the one that most of the fans were excited about. He was here on Friday, and somebody sent me pictures of him having breakfast with Kirk, and so I posted those on Twitter, and they had that turned out to be well received. But he was from Duke, and had some really good offenses both at Duke and Memphis, and have been around. But Tim Lester was one that I think I guess the fans just a lot of them, I would say, just kind of fell in that category of it's a fallback, it's safe, it's typical Kirk, it's a MAC coach that he knows, that blah blah blah. But looking, and trying to soak up as much as I can on him, they did have some potent offenses. They were ranked in the top 25 3 times, the top 35 4 years in a row. They averaged 30 some odd points 5 years in a row when he was at Western Michigan as the head coach. So I think there's some opportunities there. And with Iowa returning all of its offensive linemen, plus plucking a former 5-star, the starting left tackle at Alabama, who returned home, and Luke Lachey coming back, I think there's some opportunity for this offense to really change and get better, especially in the passing game with the right type of leader. And Tim Lester was a quarterback, and has coached at a lot of different levels. So I think most people, when they're rational, will kind of accept it and not criticize it until they actually get to see him on, like the spring practice or something.
Yeah, no, Scott, I'm with you, because, most coaches that, fizzle out tend to not have a very good ending to their previous stop. And, just like Paul Christ, that was Tim Lester. And, just because that last season didn't go according to plan, you can't forget about what came first. I mean, he had a wide receiver at one point that was drafted top 5 overall in Corey Davis. He had Sky Moore that went to the draft a little bit later in 2022. So, I mean, these are guys that, Sky Moore, not as much, and Corey Davis didn't have the career anybody thought either, but these were highly valued prospects, and he's somebody that helped produce those guys. You mentioned the change, though, on offense, and I'm trying to wrap my head around what Iowa could be doing next year. You mentioned, revamping the passing scheme, but what do you think Iowa is trying to become by hiring Tim Lester? What can we really expect this offense to look like next season?
I think it's more of a matter of they're going to keep the foundation of what they like to do, and they may be able to finally, because they have a left tackle now in Caden Proctor that'll be able to do this, is maintain what it wants to do, and that's run zone. But then also just, the problems I saw through the passing game, and I think that Lester probably should be able to attack, is just horrific spacing and route tree and just there were so many times where you get two guys who were within 5 yards of one another, and then there would be 40 yards of nothingness in the passing game. And so schematically, I think that's something that a former quarterback, somebody who's called plays, somebody who's he worked at Purdue and helped David Blau for a little while, somebody who might be able to organize that a little bit better and space the field. I think that's just because, Iowa doesn't have any blazers necessarily. And other than a tight end, they don't have anybody who can really, post up on anybody. So it's just, they needed some changes there. And I think that's what I see. I don't know that they're going to go formationally much different. I mean, they've kind of been pretty balanced between 12 personnel, 2 tight ends and 11 personnel of 3 wide receivers. I expect that to be the case again. I don't think Kirk would allow it to say, well, we're going to go air raid here either, but they're going to run the football. It's going to be balanced. It's just going to be about how do you untangle. It's like having some kid with really big frizzy hair and having a comb stuck in it and twist it all around. That's what they need to do with the passing game.
We're talking with Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Scott, got about a minute left here with you. How do you think they'll measure success in year one with Tim Lester at OC? Because obviously the bar has been set reasonably low in the past few years of the offense. Is it going to be enough just to beat kind of what this Iowa offense has done in the last couple of years, or do you think there is a higher expectation bringing somebody new in?
Yeah, there's going to be a higher expectation, no doubt. I mean, this was such a bad offense, let's just say, the last 2 years in particular, and they still won 10 games. And I know that people have said, well, look at who they beat. Well, they had to win those games too, and they returned 9 out of the 11 starters they had on defense. So they're going to be still pretty good and stout on that side of the ball. They had, as I said, they're going to return their entire offensive line, plus have the starting left tackle for Alabama for all 14 games is coming in. All their best tight end, all their running backs are back. So it's going to be really moving forward with that passing game. And maybe you figuratively have the drive for 325 again, but I think it's going to be about averaging 25 points and 350 yards a game.
I think I need to correct something here too. I think Corey Davis was actually the year before Tim Lester. I think he was Kirk Shiraka. Okay.
Yeah. And PJ Fleck.
Yeah, that's right. That was like the 19 touchdown season for Coleman. So, okay, maybe it is underwhelming for Iowa fans.
There you go.
Scott, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you joining us. I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
Scott Dochterman. We will have more coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Ravi Lula. Andrew Rogers here with me.
What up?
We're live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. And you know who's going to be live on February 3rd is our friends over at the Omaha Supernovas. We saw them kick off the first ever Pro Volleyball Federation match a week ago, or last week.
About a week ago.
Yeah, not quite a week ago yet, but last week against the Atlanta Vibe. They return to action a week. No, it's this Friday, right? Or this Saturday, right? It was a week from.
Yep.
Man, it's coming up quick.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, the Supernovas take the court again, this time against the San Diego Mojo. That is their second match of the season. Make sure you get to supernovas.com for your single game tickets and season tickets. If you want to buy tickets for the rest of the season, you can do that as well at supernovas.com. You can check the schedule, roster, anything you want over at supernovas.com. Join the volleyball movement sweeping across the country and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas. Again, everything you need to know at supernovas.com.
And here's what I would recommend. If you are hesitant about buying season tickets, go to a match. And then you'll realize I should
it.
probably be here for every single one.
Everybody that I talked to that went, and I wasn't able to go, so I'm excited to go soon. Everybody I talked to that went was blown away by the experience. They were blown away by the talent on the court. We talk about it every time I remind you to go out and see them, but this is about the greatest collection of talent you'll ever see on a volleyball court. It's a who's who from all these college volleyball matches that we've seen over the years. Just an incredible assimilation of talent for not just the Supernovas, but the rest of the teams in the league as well. We saw that with the Atlanta Vibe last week. We'll see it again with the San Diego Mojo on Saturday as well. So I would really encourage you to get out. I'm certainly going to get out and go see them as well. Can't wait to get some more great volleyball action here in Omaha. Wanted to jump back into a discussion we were having about some of the quarterbacks that we saw this past weekend during conference championship weekend. One of the most interesting ones to me is Jared Goff. And you gave a great comp for him in Matt Ryan. And he's a really interesting one because Matt Ryan brings up a topic that I find really fascinating, because we have this tendency as a culture, society, sports fans, whatever, to say if something hasn't happened yet, then it's not capable of happening, right? Matt Ryan didn't win a Super Bowl. That doesn't mean Matt Ryan wasn't capable of winning a Super Bowl as your quarterback, right? They were up 28-3 in a Super Bowl. They were
reminding everybody.
They were capable of winning a Super Bowl, right? You don't get a 25-point lead in a Super Bowl and not be capable of winning it. Obviously, it didn't play out that way, but they were very, if a million things in a row don't go right for the Patriots, the Falcons win a Super Bowl, right? It doesn't mean you're not capable of winning a Super Bowl. It was the same thing. You want to go back to Moneyball, right? Everybody was like, oh, you can't win playoff baseball that way, right? And then, the A's didn't ever do it. Guess who used Moneyball to win their first World Series in 86 years? The Red Sox. 2 years later, right? And then the entire
league wanted Billy Beane to be the spearhead of that project.
Instead,
they just read the book.
He briefly accepted that job before going back to Oakland. They're like, well, we'll go get this other guy who has the same ideas as Theo Epstein. That worked out pretty well. The rest of the league for the next decade about won with those principles. The same thing happened with the 7 seconds or less Suns, right? Everybody's like, you can't win basketball with jump shooting and with that fast pace of play and whatever. And guess what? The Suns didn't win it. A couple years later, the Warriors did. Just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it wasn't capable of happening. So that brings us to Jared Goff. Jared Goff may not ever win a Super Bowl. Does that mean he's not capable of winning a Super Bowl? Because I don't think it does. Because I think Matt Ryan, again, is the perfect comp for him. Matt Ryan didn't win a Super Bowl. Certainly could have. Matt Ryan in a different team probably would have. Mm-hmm. You're telling me, let's switch Matt Ryan for Tom Brady on one of those really, really good Patriots teams. I'm not saying Matt Ryan's as good as Tom Brady, but they could have won a Super Bowl with Matt Ryan, right? You could very easily win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff, but will he? That's where the conversation gets interesting, because we don't know what his career looks like the rest of the way with Detroit. We don't know. I mean, it seems like Ben Johnson's going to get a head coaching job through this cycle. It seems like Commanders are the one that is the most tightly linked to his situation. But, okay, so what do they do at offensive coordinator? But we saw Jared Goff get to a Super Bowl with the Rams. We saw him take a 24-7 lead in a conference championship game with the Lions. I think that alone tells you he's capable of winning a Super Bowl as your quarterback. Now, Sam brought up a good point with Patrick Mahomes. Jared Goff probably isn't going to be the reason you win a Super Bowl the way Mahomes is, but that doesn't mean he can't do it. That's where you get into this interesting conversation about quarterbacks who can win a Super Bowl for you and quarterbacks that you win a Super Bowl because of. And there's a pretty big difference there, in my opinion.
Yeah, because there's very few that you win a Super Bowl because of.
It's a very small number.
A lot of times you'll find out that you find, let's look at one of those Giants teams with Eli Manning. You didn't win a Super Bowl because Eli Manning won you a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Those defenses were really good.
Incredible.
And they had some nice pieces that also helped propel the Giants to win those games.
And you have to get a little lucky, right? The David Tyree catch, a little bit lucky. Like, you have to get a little lucky.
When the Saints won a Super Bowl with Drew Brees, was Drew Brees the reason that they won the Super Bowl? Partially.
But that's the best defense they had the entire time in New Orleans.
That defense was insane.
That was the best. It was the defense against Peyton Manning. That's the reason they won that Super Bowl.
And so I think that's the category Jared Goff falls into. He's not going to be the reason that you win a Super Bowl, but he is going to fall into that mix of quarterbacks that if he were to win a Super Bowl, he's going to have a really, really good defense, and the pieces around him are going to work. Yeah, are going to have to. You're going to have to make it happen, and you may need a little bit of luck.
And you're going to have a Jahmyr Gibbs and a Montgomery as your running game to dice up the 49ers the way they did in the first half, right? Like, you're going to need. And again, that's most quarterbacks, right? Most quarterbacks that win a Super Bowl need a lot of help, right? You look at even the great ones. Not like Joe Montana was doing that stuff by himself. Look at those 49ers teams in the 80s. Stacked, right? Also, maybe the greatest football player of all time, Jerry Rice, was on those teams, right? Certainly the greatest non-quarterback of all time was on those teams. You had great defenses. You had Roger Craig, who's maybe one of the most underrated running backs of all time, who should be a Hall of Famer. You look at Kurt Warner in the 2000s with the Rams. That team was stacked offensively. That team was so good. Most guys can't do it by themselves. Most guys aren't. Like, there's some years that Brady won where you're like, there's not a ton there. This year offensively, if Mahomes wins, will be his most impressive performance because there's not a ton there on offense. You have an aging Kelsey as your best player on offense outside of Mahomes. And most guys aren't in that category, though.
And don't forget, Dan Marino didn't do it by himself.
He didn't do it at all.
He didn't have anybody.
Exactly.
He didn't do it at all.
He had no help there. I mean, nowadays, if you're going to win the Super Bowl, you got to have another HOFer on your team with you, pretty much so.
Maybe not. But most of those guys, pro. Yeah, most of those guys end up there.
Yeah,
just because,
and
they build their.
You got to have somebody around your quarterback, at least one other guy.
The Super Bowl also, it's really hard to. And Sam brought this up, and it was a fair point. A lot of times the Super Bowl is what makes you a Hall of Famer, right? Like, I'm not sure there's another single game in all of sports that determines a way we view a guy's career more than the Super Bowl.
For a quarterback?
For any position in any sport.
So you're saying like a wide receiver, if he doesn't have a Super Bowl, that he wouldn't be
but I'm saying if a wide receiver shows out in the Super Bowl, it changes the way we view him in a way that almost no other single game does in any sport.
So, okay, because this is
obviously quarterbacks are the most
right.
Most dramatic.
This one hits close to home. So David Freese, he shows out in 2 games in the World Series, becomes a World Series MVP because of that.
Right?
Should he be an MLB Hall of Famer?
I mean, probably not, because the rest of his career doesn't. But also, it's 2 games, right? If you have one really good World Series game and you have a nice career besides that.
So the nice career is what goes along with it, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
But if you think of the guys with nice careers, like we think of Dan Marino in a totally different way if he's got a Super Bowl. Like, he's a really, really good quarterback, but the first line of his resume is often, or the second line of his resume after all the stats is didn't win a Super Bowl.
So if Dan Marino won 1 Super Bowl,
we talk about him like Aaron Rodgers instead of the cautionary tale. It changes. Drew Brees is a great example of this. We talk about Drew Brees like he's Kirk Cousins if he doesn't have a Super Bowl, because Kirk Cousins puts up incredible numbers, right? Dak Prescott puts up incredible numbers. If Drew Brees doesn't get a Super Bowl, we talk about him like one of those guys and not like the guys that he's grouped in with, like the Peyton Mannings of the world. Peyton Manning is another great example. If he doesn't get Super Bowls, we talk about him in a totally different way than we do now.
Well, you talk about him in the Dan Marino way, but I still think Dan Marino is in his own conversation.
He is, because he's such an outlier for being that good and not having one.
Right. And I think, as we talked about earlier on in the show, you look at the good and great and you find somewhere in the middle to put those guys.
Yeah.
You still lean Dan Marino more than like the middle of the good and great, like toward the great more than the halfway point.
But it excludes him from being in the GOAT conversation because he didn't do it. Like, it is.
But even if he did it once, you're still not in the GOAT conversation.
No, but he's probably in the Rodgers conversation. Like, he's in that neighborhood, and he's not even there right now, even though his career would lend itself to being that type of guy. It's crazy.
Could he be in the Aaron Rodgers conversation without the Super Bowl? I think that's what people really should be asking
Marino's
themselves.
Super Bowl was when he beat the 85 Bears.
Because I think if you really look at Dan Marino, he could be in the Aaron Rodgers category right now.
Oh, probably. We've got more coming up next. Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln for this hour number 3. It is time for the Warhorse Sportsbook Sports Cleanup, which means it's also time for me to remind you we just have a couple days left for you to get qualified for the Warhorse Festival of Games. They've got their prop card challenge and the grand prize drawing. You've got till February 1st. That's Wednesday, I think. Wednesday?
Thursday. 31 days in January.
Nailed it. You've got till Thursday, February 1st, to qualify and get entries in for the prop card challenge, which is worth $100,000, or the grand prize drawing worth $20,000. All you have to do, go to the Warhorse Sportsbook and Casino in Lincoln, place a $50 sports bet. Every $50 sportsbook ticket gets you an entry into both the prop card challenge and the grand prize drawing. You need to be a rewards member to validate those entries. But once you've done that, you are eligible for the prop card challenge. All you got to do, sounds easy enough, just go 25 for 25 on the prop card challenge.
Let's do it.
You've got your shot at $100,000 at that point. Or
gimme.
Even if you go over, like I probably will, you still got a shot at your $20,000 grand prize drawing as well. You have any questions? You need more explanation on the details? Go to warhorsecasino.com. They've got you covered. This is for the casino in Lincoln only. So if you're in Omaha, go ahead and make that short little drive. If you're listening to us on KFOR in Lincoln, go ahead and hop on down the road to the Warhorse Casino in Lincoln. Get yourself qualified for that $100,000 prop card challenge and the $20,000 grand prize drawing. That's the Warhorse Festival of Games. Warhorse Sportsbook, no bets, no glory. Time for the sports cleanup. A lot happened this weekend outside of the NFL. And a couple of those things in the National Basketball Association. And listen, I'm not going to go like game by game or anything like that, but
why not?
There was a couple interesting things that happened that I think people are interested in. First and foremost, so Joel Embiid, who MVP last year, obviously having another great year this year, seems like he's afraid of Nikola Jokic. He was scratched about, like a handful of minutes before their game in Denver. Joel Embiid has not played a game in Denver since 2019. 2019. He's played against Denver at home, has not played a game in Denver since 2019, famously missed a potential MVP versus MVP matchup last year towards the end of the year against Jokic as well. People were losing their minds on Twitter over this because this is one of the marquee matchups in the NBA. If we ever got to see it happen, Joel Embiid versus Nikola Jokic, two of the best players in the league, play the same position. Because a lot of times you have these things, right? You know, when LeBron goes up against Steph Curry, they're not actually playing each other, right? LeBron plays his position, Steph plays his position. You're not really guarding each other very often. You don't get these matchups the way it's billed on the commercial, right? Embiid and Jokic, you get those guys against each other, banging heads the whole time, except Embiid doesn't seem like he wants any of that smoke. It's just something to keep an eye on. The other thing to keep an eye on, your defending MVP, if he misses 6 more games this season, is ineligible for postseason awards. They made a new rule this year. You have to play 65 games to be eligible. And it was to help against some stuff like this where guys are being healthy scratches, although he had a sore left knee, apparently. I bet he plays his next game, though. You have to play 65 games. If he misses 6 more, he will be under that threshold and will be ineligible. He could average 40 points a game for the rest of the year. He can't win the MVP if he misses 6 more games. So that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing that happened in the NBA is, so last week we talked about, of course, Joel Embiid, of all people, scoring 70 points. Well, Luka Doncic comes out and says...
it's an every week thing. You didn't know that?
Apparently it is now, Luka Doncic goes out and scores 73. And I got to be honest, as much as I love the NBA, like it feels like they're taking a little bit of shine off of 70 here. I need it to be a little bit more special. It's like that one year in Major League Baseball where they threw 9 no-hitters. And I was like, yeah, it does. That's a no-hitter every month at that point in the season.
That was insane, though.
It was crazy. But it's like, this doesn't feel as special as it used to.
It kind of made you sit back and think, well, what's cool about that? Like, you did it like 3 weeks ago. And at one point in that season, it was like 2 days separated a no-hitter.
Yeah, I mean, for Edwin Jackson threw one, for God's sake. Like,
who's that?
Exactly.
Who's Edwin Jackson?
I think he was pitching for your Cardinals at the time.
I don't think so. I don't think it was that. I think he was maybe Seattle.
I don't remember where he was.
Edwin Jackson.
He had like 9 walks though. So in that one.
So guess what, man? It still goes down in the books as a no-hitter.
Listen, I'm counting it.
You know what? Gosh, was it last week that I asked what sports moment lives rent-free in your mind?
Yeah.
Do you remember the Armando Galarraga perfect game?
Oh, absolutely.
Was taken away because Jim Joyce wanted to play hero.
Terrible call.
That right there. I think I could tell you every moment in that game, but I couldn't tell you 3 pitchers that threw a no-hitter that year.
Wasn't there an incredible catch to save that no-hitter?
Austin Jackson.
Yeah. There was center field
catch in center. And you know what? You see a lot of those plays. Who was the Cincinnati pitcher that got saved because of the dope catch in left field?
Oh, he was with the Diamondbacks, by the way. Edward Jackson,
there you go.
The 8 walk no hitter. I'm trying to remember. I don't know, but there was a Mark Burley one. It was, I think, Dwayne Weiss made robbed a home run in one of the Mark Burley, either the no hitter or the perfect game. I can't remember which one for Mark Burley. But Dwayne, I think
Wade Miley. That's who it was.
Wade
Do
Miley.
you remember Wade Miley?
I do remember Wade Miley.
17th no-hitter in Cincy history. Who made the catch in left to save that?
Wade Miley. That wouldn't have been oh man, who would have been in Cincinnati at the time?
Wait. Nope, I got it wrong. It was Washington. It was Jordan Zimmerman's no-hitter, and it was Steven Souza. That's how you say it. Souza?
Yeah.
Yeah, he made that sick catch in left field. That's exactly who it was.
But yeah, so you've got basically the 70 in I think I read a stat. There's been as many 70-point games in the last like 24 months as there were in like the 30 years prior to that. So listen, I love the NBA. I love the scoring. I think part of it is because teams, when you start to get to a good number, people kind of start feeding them a little bit, like they tried to do with Cat last week, and he still couldn't get to 70, even though he had 44 in the first half. I also, I'll be honest, I've got a little bit of a vendetta is probably too strong of a word, but I have a little bit of a bone to pick with Luka Doncic because
he did it in Atlanta.
No, well, that's part. I mean, it doesn't, does.
How about those fans looking down and thinking, we traded Luka Doncic for Trae Young.
Yeah.
We got Trae Young, and we could have had 70 points.
That's a little rough. But I have a problem. I have a little problem with Luka because I was a huge Luka guy in the draft. I was adamant that he was the best player in the draft, should go number 1. That has aged very well. But I am really frustrated with how he's chosen to play basketball. He's basically decided to be James Harden in terms of the way he plays, super ball-centric, ball-dominant
right now
guy.
It's working.
It is working right now, but it's super not going to work in the playoffs because that's not.
So if Luka Doncic doesn't win an NBA championship, where does he fall on the scale between good and great?
See, if a guy of his caliber doesn't win an NBA championship, that is a huge hole in his resume. It's the same thing. Like, it's the biggest argument against like James Harden. Like James Harden being a multiple-time MVP, not having the ability to ever win a championship, despite the fact that he has played with a boatload of Hall of Famers and other MVPs.
He's had plenty of opportunity.
Yes, right? Luka has had less opportunity in terms of who his teammates are, but it's been super frustrating because he had the ability to play like a really beautiful style of basketball, and instead he's decided to be James Harden, and it really makes me mad. So I can't even really take joy in his 73 because I've I've sort of checked out on the Luka Doncic experience.
Well, I mean, you also have to think if somebody's scoring 73 points, they better be acting like James Harden out there.
Although I will say he was hyper efficient. It was like he was like 25 for 33.
Right.
It's not like he was out there.
Embiid was whenever he scored. Like if somebody's scoring 70 points, you have to be a ball hog. You have to make it all about you that one game.
That one game. The problem is it's been all about Luka pretty much every game for his entire career.
Well, surround him with some more talent, and maybe it won't be.
That's a chicken or an egg situation, right? Is he playing like that because they don't surround him with better people, or do they not surround him with better people because he wants to play like that, right? Because a lot of guys aren't going to sign up to go play that style of basketball. But again, it's a chicken or an egg. Does he want to play that kind of basketball, and so that's why he has to do it? Or does he have to play that kind of basketball because they can't get anybody?
Do you look at it like Dame Lillard, like his situation in Portland? I mean, that's kind of how you could view it as, you have to.
Yeah.
But like when Dame was paired with CJ McCollum, that is, they still couldn't get it done.
Yeah.
But then Dame goes over to Milwaukee, and yes, you have Giannis, who's actually the superstar.
Yeah,
Dame's
the
more
dude.
Kyrie Irving to LeBron James here.
Absolutely, yeah.
You get it to work because he isn't like the guy. But I'm not saying that's what you do with Luka, because I feel Luka is so talented that you can't.
Luka needs to be the Giannis in that situation.
You have to make him the guy, but who do you pair him with? And there's ability.
Ironically, they've got Kyrie.
Right, right. But you could pair him with maybe a big man at this point, and that could all change.
Yeah, and so I hope his career kind of turns trajectory a little bit, but I've been a little frustrated with the Luka Doncic experience so far in his first handful of years.
Ken says the NBA doesn't play defense anymore. Ravi or AR could hang out at the key and score double digits.
Well, that's because
I don't know. I mean, I can chop, but I don't know if I'm scoring double digits.
I got not with the hand. Right
maybe
now,
lefty.
Yeah, maybe lefty. Just do a little,
be a little ambidextrous today.
No, that listen, I get a little. I'm not going to go off on my NBA tangent right now. I'm not going to do it.
About the defense?
Yes, because that's just patently inaccurate, but it's fine.
All
I
heard there, Ken, was accurate. Good take.
Not gonna get into it today. Some other things that have happened around the sports world. We mentioned of course the Iowa Hawkeyes with their underwhelming offensive coordinator candidate. We also
Tim Lester. Like that's who you want.
I almost feel like Kirk Ferentz is trolling people.
Well, and let's be honest. Like I know I brought up a lot of the things that Tim Lester did well at Western Michigan, and Scott also mentioned the offenses, like the top 25 offenses that he was able to create there. But they're also Western Michigan, and remember, Western Michigan plays in what? Isn't it the MAC?
Yeah, they play in the MAC.
Like, okay, a team's playing on Wednesday night in their top 25 in offense. Well, they're playing MAC teams.
Action, baby.
So, I don't want to get like too invested into that. I mean, Tim Lester did have success, or else he wouldn't be where he is today.
Here's what you need to know about Tim Lester, though.
But this is what gets me before you get into the Tim Lester thing. They waited 3 months. They knew Brian Ferentz wasn't going to be there months before they fired Brian Ferentz.
Yes.
So this all should have been taken care of,
at least
behind the scenes,
at least
to have
an idea.
2 or 3 candidates of who you want. Instead, it turned into, well, no. So after bowl season, I'm going to wait till after Christmas. Like I'm going to take my break. I'm going to wait till after the new year.
We heard Scott say he didn't do anything until January.
What are we doing?
I mean, Kirk Ferentz was fired in November.
Brian Ferentz.
Maybe Kirk should have too. Brian Ferentz was let go.
Shots.
Was fired in November, and like you're just waiting 6 weeks before you even. I mean, I really, there's a part of me that I almost feel like Kirk is like, oh, you think Brian was so bad? I'll show you bad.
And maybe Lester can really revamp the offense. But, as you go back and look at this, I just can't get over the fact that, he was Western Michigan. It wasn't like he was doing it in a Power 5 conference before.
The other thing that you have to know here is Tim Lester, had he not gotten this job, was going to be the offensive coordinator at Troy.
Yeah, Troy.
I don't know if you know this about Troy. They are not a Power 5 team. They are not.
Not right now.
No, and I don't think anytime in the near future either.
I don't know. John Summerall did awesome.
Listen,
did great work at Troy.
Troy is a nice program. If Troy, it's kind of like recruiting, right? If the only other team recruiting a guy is Troy, you better have a ton of conviction on who that guy is in order to be like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and take
Was Tulane a backup option for Lester? Did I read that? Or were they looking at the Tulane offensive coordinator?
I think they might have been looking at the Tulane offense.
Because they were also looking at Duke's offensive coordinator.
Yes, the guy that was under Mike Elko, I believe. But yeah, they were. I mean, Tim Lester was set to take the job at Troy. I don't really.
Sometimes you're left with scraps.
Sometimes when you wait till January to start your search, yeah, you're going to be left with scraps.
Unless they know something we don't and thought because Lester was with Green Bay that they knew the guy that they wanted, but had to wait until Green Bay was out.
Kind of like Glenn Thomas with Nebraska and Glenn Thomas.
But Glenn Thomas also isn't the OC.
And Glenn Thomas also has a history with Matt Rule that he knows what Glenn Thomas is and what he's getting out of Glenn Thomas. Tim Lester, if you know what you're getting out of Tim Lester, it is not exciting in terms of what he finished at least with Central Michigan. I'm having a hard time thinking that Kirk Ferentz isn't trolling everybody. Like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I think he maybe is just messing with us.
Built on defense.
I mean,
and they're going to stay built on defense.
He's going to have a hard time scoring those defensive touchdowns without Cooper DeJean around anymore.
Yeah, and they're also going to have a tough time just matching point for point with a team like Oregon.
Well, that's the thing.
With a team like USC.
Like, USC might have a hard time scoring to a certain extent on Iowa, but if Iowa's offense or if Iowa's defense is on the field for 45 minutes,
they're going to make USC's defense look like they're a top 10 defense.
Yeah, they really are. So yeah, that's that I saw that name and I was like, man, I feel like Kirk is just kind of giving a middle finger to Iowa's administration for letting go of Brian.
What was the term you used? Iowa gonna Iowa?
Iowa gonna Iowa. It is what it is. Another thing that I saw over the weekend. Well, first, before I keep going, anything over the weekend that you saw that that caught your attention?
I told you this, and I was doing some stuff at home, and sports kind of took a back seat, believe it or not, which is weird because normally that's not the case. There were a few things that came across Twitter with Caitlin Clark that made me laugh. The first thing, I think it was on Friday night. Did you see the alternate view to the stork corming? Or the stork corming? Did you just hear what I just said there? The court storming. I said the stork corming.
There we go.
I don't even recognize.
I don't even recognize who I am today.
I
told you, man. I've been having some of these weird blunders. Like it started with the Panthers being an AFC team, and now it's ended with Stork corming.
We hope
in the mix, it was Corey Davis was on Tim Lester's team. Like I'm telling you, I'll get there, guys. Trust me. At home, I'll get there. By tomorrow, I'm going to be locked in.
We got it.
Locked up. No, but I saw the alternate view, and I'm like, ooh, that one didn't make Caitlin Clark look as good because I defended Caitlin at first. And not to say that I won't still, but I defended her in the aspect of, well, you lose a game, your head is down, you're running to the tunnel. Like you're just you're trying to make a beeline. You're not really worried about anybody else or your surroundings. You're just going from point A to point B. And then you see the view from up top from the camera underneath the halo. And it looks as though you can really see the circus act take place after contact has been made. And I'm like, maybe she did flop.
So here's what I think happened.
Maybe she did get a little floppy.
Here's what I think happened. I don't think the contact was as dramatic as the fall would made it appear to.
All I heard in my head was do 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 as she's like making the spin.
I don't know if it was a flop. I think it was one of those things like you remember like when you were a kid and something would kind of catch you off guard, but not actually hurt you that much. And it felt like it was bigger. Yeah, I think it was almost the shock of somebody hitting her that made her do that, as opposed to like, yeah, she didn't actually get hit that hard because if she had, she probably would have had some sort of injury. I think it was just the shock of being run into that kind of put her into the dramatics mode. I don't know that it was a conscious, like, oh, I'm going to flop here so I can get this person in trouble.
Well, and so that's why, leading into my point before Shane jumps in, that's another reason I was paying close attention to Caitlin this weekend, was because she was taking on the Husker women's basketball team. And no matter how floppy or how complaining you think she can be, she dropped 38 again and was Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, she's a good player.
Pretty
Go ahead,
good.
Shane.
It's always interesting to see when a player or coach or anybody that's doing the athletics or whatever goes from being in playing mode to getting out of the playing mode. You know, when the game's over, like when do you turn it off? Because you see coaches kind of get, you know, mad in the press conferences afterwards. You know, they're still in game mode. You know, it's like when does Caitlin Clark get out of game mode and just go into like just being the normal person? You know, I mean, maybe she was kind of doing that and she wasn't on her ones and twos, I guess.
Now, the other thing that I took notice of this weekend, especially with Creighton, and it's a good lead in to Jacob Padilla, who we'll talk to next. I think Stephen Ashworth is finding his touch.
I do too.
I think it's coming at the perfect time, because he still has 5 games to really show what he can do. And then it's UConn, and then it's Marquette, and then it's St. John's. And I know I didn't do that in order, but you know what I'm getting at.
Well, and I also think what's interesting about Stephen Ashworth is I think he started finding his groove on the defensive end first. In the last handful of games, and Coach McDermott has said this, he went from being kind of a liability, and they would take him off the court for Francisco Farabello, to being a guy they really feel like they can trust defensively. And after that happened, he really has seemed to find a better rhythm offensively as well. Now, he's not going to be the main focus of the offense, but they need him to be a contributor and to knock down open shots and occasionally create something for himself or others. If he can do that, that really unlocks a lot of the rest of the offense, because you can't focus as much on Trey Alexander. You can't focus as much on Baylor Shireman. You can't focus as much on Ryan Kalkbrenner. And then you've still got Mason Miller in the corners.
Well, Ashworth needs to be that bridge player in between the top 3 and Mason Miller.
Yes.
Like, he has to be that, you know, we've been talking. I'm going to go back to great versus good here. Instead of being like the great player, he's also not the good player. He needs to be that player in between.
Yeah.
Like, that's what works for Creighton, having him be that sort of in-between guy that can help bridge the gap of, I can get you 8 points or I can get you 15 points.
Yeah, and if he can do that consistently, then Creighton's going to be in really good shape. But it's really interesting to see how his season has evolved, starting on the defensive end, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is kind of the guy I thought they were getting.
This is the 40% three-point shooter that we saw last season.
This is the guy I thought they were getting offensively when he transferred here. And, you know, I think part of it's the adjustment from going from Utah State to Creighton, although the Mountain West is a very good conference. But I think it's also the adjustment in role, right? His role with Creighton is a lot different than his role was with Utah State. And I think that takes as much of an adjustment for guys as the actual different level of competition. We can talk to Jacob Padilla about that. Our very own Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports, going to talk to us about the Pink Out game, Creighton, what they've got coming up next on the schedule, all coming up next year on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, as well as on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Ravi Lula. Andrew Rogers here with me. Before we get to our friend Jacob Padilla, I want to tell you about the Team Jack Foundation. Team Jack currently is funding 13 projects and collaborating with national institutions such as the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and Columbia University to eventually find a cure for childhood brain cancer. But in the meantime, trying to find better treatments as well, because the treatments that are being used today are decades old, 45 plus years old, and can be highly toxic to the child. Even if they survive the brain tumor, they're often left with lifelong issues because of how damaging the treatments themselves can be. The goal is to find a better way to get these children to survive and not have these lifelong issues from the treatment. One of the largest projects that Team Jack has been working on is with the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the creation of the Nebraska Childhood Brain Tumor Program. If you want to get involved, they've raised over $12 million to date and counting. If you want to get involved, go check out teamjackfoundation.org. Then you can find out what events they're doing. You can figure out how to donate and how else you can get involved. That's teamjackfoundation.org. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is our friend Jacob Padilla from our own Hurrdat Sports. Jacob, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How about you?
What's up, JP?
You know,
hey.
we're doing pretty good here. Creighton got a win over DePaul. Didn't look great in the first half. A little defensive lapsing that first half against the Blue Demons, but they were able to kick it into gear for the second half. How much of that first half effort do you think was maybe overlooking the opponent? How much of it do you think is, that pink out game's always super emotional? How did you evaluate what went on in that first half where they gave up 37 points to a very bad DePaul team?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And Max said the same thing. Like you talk about maybe overlooking somebody. He said it didn't seem like that in their preparation. Like the way they approached the lead up to the game was pretty normal, typical. So like typically a lot of time coaches can see if guys are kind of going through the motions or just taking things for granted. And he didn't really see that in the lead up to it. So I don't really know. Like maybe it was kind of the emotions of the day or whatever, just the fact that, I mean, it's DePaul. Like they probably made more plays than Creighton thought they would in the first half.
Sure.
And then they realized, hey, no, we gotta kind of lock up here and be sharper with our positioning on defense and communication, all that sort of thing. And once they did, it was curtains. And the upside is we got to see one of those just ridiculous scoring runs that we had seen early in the season, where their offense just clicks on every cylinder and they just absolutely bury the other team. And I believe it was 26-4 run after that dunk to start the second half, and then it was ball game at that point.
JP, Baylor Shireman, excuse me. Good Lord. I am all over the map today. Said afterwards,
words are hard.
He said afterwards that the confidence is at an all-time high. And, I mentioned to Ravi right before we came to you before the last break that, speaking of somebody with confidence, it seems like Stephen Ashworth is really starting to find his shot, and he's becoming equally responsible for the way Creighton is playing right now. How much do you attribute to the difficulty to blend into the fit of this Creighton offense for Stephen Ashworth early on? And how have you seen him like really start to find his true role within this offense over, say, the last 3-4 games?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like making the adjustment is not easy. We saw it with Baylor Sharman last year, what he was at South Dakota State, came here to Creighton, had a completely different role. And for a while there, he was kind of just feeling his way out, trying not to do too much. And then mid-season, you start to see him be a little bit more assertive and figure out, all right, this is what I can do for this team. This is what they need from me. And now this season, after having an off season to really prepare and work on his body and lock in on exactly what the team needs from him, you look at his numbers and they're basically the same or better than what he did his last year at South Dakota State when he was one of the best mid-major players in the country. And now he's doing that at a high major level. So there's definitely an adjustment coming from a lower level to the Big East and then in Creighton's system. And I think it's kind of been a feeling out process for the whole team, particularly with kind of the initiating and with Stephen Ashworth and Trey Alexander and Baylor and who's doing what, and kind of who has the ball and all that sort of thing. And I think we've seen Ashworth really settle in on both sides of the ball. And the shot, obviously last game was a really good one, went 5 of 9 from 3. And we saw what that means for Creighton's offense when that starts to happen. They put together that big run in the second half, like I talked about. And part of that were threes falling. And Trey and Steven combined to score the first 19 of those points between the two. And I think Trey created most of the shots that Ashworth hit. So that was what we saw kind of that first game. Obviously, Florida A&M or whatever offered no resistance whatsoever. But we saw that kind of chemistry and the flow between the guards and those guys setting each other up for wide open looks and all that sort of thing. And that's kind of what it needs to look like. And hitting shots is part of that. And if that does happen, like if Ashworth gets back to knocking down the wide open shots that he's hit his whole career at a good rate, then this offense is going to become even more dangerous, because I do think Ashworth, obviously the assist turnover ratio is skyrocketed, and he's doing a much better job of kind of setting guys up and figuring out how to make plays for others. And they're keeping Kalkbrenner more involved the last few games. So they found a way to get the offense the kind of balance that it needs to keep teams honest and to make the game easy for everybody. And if Ashworth starts hitting threes on top of that, in addition to what he's doing on defense and setting guys up now, then I think this Creighton team will start to look kind of like what we thought it would heading into the season.
We're talking with Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports. Jacob, you mentioned a couple of guys there that I think are really important to how guys like Stephen Ashworth have been able to play. The first one there was Trey Alexander. After having a little bit of a slump midseason, it seems like he has been in the form that we expected him to be in this year. You mentioned 23 points against DePaul, 7 assists, just 1 turnover, doing a lot of the things we thought he was capable of coming into the season. What have you seen that has allowed Trey to get back on track, or is it just sort of a persistence thing of keep kind of pounding away until he broke through?
Yeah. I mean, you look at just conference games alone, it's at the midway point of the year, he's putting up 18, 6 boards, 5 assists. He's leading them in scoring. After kind of like Baylor Sharman has been that guy throughout the season that's kind of been their rock and their most steady performer with Trey. Being so up and down and teams really game planning and take Kalkbrenner out of it and limit his touches, Baylor's been the guy that's risen to the occasion. And recently, Trey's kind of figured out how to be more what they need. I think a lot of it, he's kind of been more intentional. He's done a better job of dictating offense as opposed to letting teams just kind of bait him into what they want him to do and letting their physicality really kind of disrupt him. He's doing a better job of kind of getting downhill off of screens, being more direct with his drives to the basket. A lot of time we saw kind of him avoiding contact and kind of rounding out drives. And obviously he's not as good going left as he is going right, and teams know that. But he's found a way to do a better job of getting to his spots. Obviously, the mid-range is back. That's a huge part of his game, and he's been hitting that at a really good rate since that kind of little slump after the first 4 or 5 games or whatever it was, when shots stopped falling for him. So that going down is a big part of it. That's a big part of it. I think we've just seen him do a better job of making the plays that Creighton needs of him and kind of taking what the defense is giving him and helping keep Creighton's offense balanced, like I said.
That's Jacob Padilla from Hurrdat Sports, covers Creighton for us, as well as a ton of high school and other things as well. Jacob, we appreciate your time. I'm sure we will be checking in again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, JP.
That's our guy, Jacob Padilla of Hurrdat Sports. Coming up next, we're going to wrap up the show talking NFL once again. This time it will be with Nate Davis. He covers the NFL for USA Today as we wrap up the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. I'm Ravi Lula. Andrew Rogers here with me. Joining us now on the War Horse Sportsbook Hotline is Nate Davis. Nate covers the NFL for USA Today. Nate, how are you this morning?
A little tired. How are you guys?
Good, Nate. Thanks for joining us, though.
We're doing all right. I can imagine it was an exciting day of conference championship football in the NFL. In your memory, was this one of the better conference championship weekends that we've had in terms of competitiveness in the games?
That's a great question. I can remember I think 2 games going into overtime. I guess it was 6 years ago now with the Chiefs and the Patriots and the Rams and the Saints. That conference championship weekend really sticks out. And then of course we've had the Bengals and have had that overtime game. And so I mean there have been good games or good conference champions in recent years. I mean I was in Baltimore yesterday, and I don't know, even when the Ravens tied that game 7-7, didn't feel like the outcome was really in doubt much of the day. Obviously it was a low scoring game, but I've certainly seen more dramatic games than that one. And then the other one was obviously a big lead and then a big comeback. And I tend to think that the games that are kind of back and forth are a little bit more fun than one team building a lead and then losing it. But we did certainly have drama yesterday, so I will grant you that.
Nate, most people had the 49ers getting to the Super Bowl when the playoffs started, but not as many had the Chiefs. I don't know if you could hear the call coming into you from Mitch Holtis, but you could tell how passionate he was, describing how people turned a blind eye to the Chiefs because of who they were coming into the playoffs. But if there's any team that it doesn't come as a complete surprise that they made it to the Super Bowl, it's the Chiefs. Is this what you envisioned when postseason ball began, 49ers Chiefs, or did you have it as a different story?
I don't. I mean, you kind of said it perfectly. I don't think this is what I would have picked. And frankly, it's not what I picked. I was picking along with 7 of my other colleagues these games middle of last week, and it was across the board for the Ravens. I would have thought that if there was a split opinion, it would have been some people at least picking the Chiefs and everybody picking the 49ers. But I think we had 3 people pick the Lions, but everyone picked Baltimore. So that was a bit of a surprise. But by the same token, I also kind of did a confidence meter in all the quarterbacks going into the playoffs. And the number one guy, really without reservation, is going to be Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
That came to pass, and I mean he's the guy that's done it for years. And maybe there was, I don't know if it was a question, but certainly there was a fascination of he'd never won playoff games or played playoff games on the road. I think he kind of got a kick out of doing that. But I mean he's 14-3 now in the playoffs, so I don't think this comes as a surprise. But by the same token, I think also you can't deny the fact that going into the game, it was a very easy case to make that the Ravens had been the best team this year. I mean, they'd beaten all comers just about, and usually by substantial margins. And certainly the game with the 49ers on Christmas stands out, and then to dismantle the Dolphins the way they did. I mean, and then just coming off the win against Houston the week before, which was a bit of a tale of two halves, but I mean, they looked awesome in the second half of that game. So yeah, I didn't feel too badly about picking the Ravens, so I didn't do it with supreme confidence. But I thought there was a better team going into that game, despite the presence of Patrick Mahomes on that field.
You're going to have to deal with the Chiefs.
We're talking with Nate Davis from USA Today. Nate, you mentioned the utmost confidence in Patrick Mahomes. You were in Baltimore yesterday. I'm curious what the vibe was around Lamar Jackson. We've talked a lot about him today, and obviously hasn't been able to get the Ravens to a Super Bowl. And, maybe you put it on Todd Monken, maybe you put it on Lamar Jackson, but maybe didn't have his best game yesterday. Do you view Lamar Jackson any differently today than you did before?
Not really. I mean, Lamar came into these playoffs, and the big question was could Lamar win playoff games? And certainly, could he win a Super Bowl? And he took a step forward. He had a great again second half, great game really against Houston. His best playoff game to date, frankly, and got to his first conference championship game. So I think he considered that progress, much the way you kind of consider his whole 2023 season. Progress, at least from the way he progressed as a passer, kind of rounded out his game. Yesterday was not his best day. I think his teammates were largely disappointed for him. I think I kind of got a vibe that they felt like they let him down a little bit. But watching the game, I mean, the Chiefs blitzed him a lot. I mean, he should have seen that coming. The Chiefs are a blitzing team. The Texans did it the week before to great effect in the first half, but then they figured it out in the second half. But he didn't quite. I think he struggles with that a little bit. And that there was a strip sack in the first half when he didn't get rid of the ball. And then I think you have to say that he said he was reading Tampa too, and kind of made a I think what he would call an informed choice on interception. But I mean, throwing into triple coverage in the end zone, I don't think it was a good decision, and that was kind of bad Lamar from years past. But overall, I think progress. Overall, I think his team has full confidence in him. And you mentioned Todd Monken. I don't understand why the best running team in the NFL this year, and one that ran for 229 yards against Houston the week before, only runs the ball 16 times. I think they only gave 6 carries to the running backs, half for Lamar. And it's not like they were behind. I mean, yeah, they got down by 10, but it's not like you had to throw all those passes. So I definitely thought the game plan wise or just adjustment wise, definitely the coaching staff maybe did let him down to a degree.
Nate, on the NFC side of things, you look at the losing team there and the Lions, and I asked this question, or maybe I brought up this point earlier on in the show about how the Lions beat themselves. They got too aggressive, but the counterpoint to that was, well, being aggressive got them there. But I also don't think, taking the points versus going for it on fourth down every time and trusting the analytics was the correct move either. Were you a take the points guy as you were watching this game, or were you no, this is Dan Campbell's way, he goes for it, and the Lions are going to be cool to win or lose by that sword?
Yeah, I didn't get to watch that game super closely. I kind of had one eye on it while I was right in there in the Baltimore press box, but I tried to watch a little bit when I got home last night. But I think it's easy for us in the media, and we do it all the time. I mean, when you see what the result is, it's easy to be critical. Sometimes, but a lot of times too, people say that stuff with foresight. I think probably me personally, I probably would have been inclined to go up the 3 scores with 17 points. That being said, you live by the sword, die by the sword, and I always admire coaches that stick to their scruples when they've got them as far as they have. And Dan Campbell's kind of been the most successful fourth down coach that's been out there. I think he uses analytics far more effectively than, say, Brandon Staley did. I mean, I'd be very comfortable criticizing Brandon Staley if he did that. I don't feel like he ever had any feel for what was going on in the game. And Dan Campbell owned it. I mean, he knew he was taking a risk, but he was also trying to put that game away as they have others. And I think that's just kind of how it goes. I kind of felt the same way about Kyle Shanahan, back in the Super Bowl. I mean, the Falcons got a 28-3 lead by playing or the game the way they did with Kyle Shanahan calling it. Why would you do anything different if that's worked out for you? So I don't have a problem with it. Would it necessarily have been the decision I would make? Maybe not, but again, no accountability on my end. I give them all the credit for hey, probably the greatest Lions season in their history of the Super Bowl era. I give Dan Campbell all the credit in the world.
Nate, we got about a minute and a half here with you. Staying with the Lions before we let you go, as you look at their roster and the way it's constructed and the guys they have on their team, do you think they'll have another opportunity to make this sort of run again, or do you think they maybe missed out on their one chance at a Super Bowl?
I mean, I think they've been trending up. I think that they've got a great leader in place with Dan Campbell. I mean, they're going to have to make a contractual decision here on Jared Goff pretty soon, and I think that no reason to expect that they would move on from him. But they've done a nice job managing the cap, managing the draft assets. I think they need a little bit more help there on the defensive side to some degree. But I like the way they're built. I mean, they're a tough team. I mean, they're built kind of out from the offensive line, which is one of the league's best. Guys like Jameson Williams become more consistent. I mean, I think they've got something on their hands. I mean, don't forget that this rookie class they had is really kind of what put them over the top, and those guys are going to be there for a while. So I think they're in pretty good shape.
That's Nate Davis from USA Today covering the NFL. Nate, we appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thanks, Nate.
That's Nate Davis, covers NFL for USA Today. That is our show.
And what did we learn today?
A Monday.
Take the points.
Well, apparently that would have done it for Detroit. if they make the kicks.
Hey,
it's a big
would
if.
they have died by the sword?
They may
have to die.
They may have died by the foot if they don't make the kicks. It's hard to tell.
Hey, sometimes you have to get a little Mortal Kombat going while you're in a sword fight.
Not everybody's got Justin Tucker. That's the show for today. We will be back tomorrow here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.